welcome to the S.O.A.P video Bible study series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are working our way through the book of Numbers, and we're down to just a couple of weeks left.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is week seven. Yeah, and we're picking up. I mean, like immediately where we left off last time. But if you were just reading through, you almost wouldn't know it.
Yeah. So why would you say that?
Well, because last time there was this whole thing with Balaam and all of this stuff, and chapter 24 ended with Balaam, they packed up their stuff and they went home.
Yeah.
And then 25 starts almost like it's a whole completely different account.
Yeah, right. So that is a big thing, right? How are these things tied together? So if you remember, they're traveling through this last part, right? They're on their way. Really on their way to the promised land this
Finally,
time.
right?
And instead of being wandering around the desert by themselves, they're now hitting all these cities that are populated, and they're having to fight their way through it. And in one city, the Moabites brought in a super cursor by the name of Balaam, and he ended up not cursing Israel,
blessing them instead.
and actually cursing the guy who was paying him,
right?
The Moabites. And then, like you said, they go away. So now we start off and we find that the Moabites are trying to intermarry.
Yep.
Or actually, they're having sexual relationship with the Israelites.
Right.
And it's really easy just to kind of continue and go through there. But if you stop and think about it, this seems to be plan B. You know, plan A was, hey, let's beat them. Ooh, these guys are pretty strong. The next plan was, let's get somebody to curse them. Well, that didn't work. What are we going to do? And in fact, not only didn't it work, he also said that the Moabite nation is going to be totally wiped out.
Right.
So let's try a different plan.
Yeah.
Right?
See if we can preserve ourselves. Everybody wants to focus on the they're intermarrying or whatever, but the key that it's sort of buried in here is that they were inviting the people. These Moabite women were inviting the people to sacrifice to their gods. And so right out of the gate here in chapter 25, we have Israel, who's just been protected by God, but not know it.
Yeah.
Turning away from God and worshiping these other gods.
A pagan local god.
Yeah. And it sounds like...
Right. And committing,
sexual immoralities.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this was one of the reasons that God wanted the Canaanites wiped out, or at least evacuated from the land.
Right.
Some of them had to die. Some of them were under God's curse. The rest of them could have evacuated. But we'll see this especially in Deuteronomy if we were to keep pushing forward. But he says the reason I want them out of the land, the reason I don't want them there when you guys move in, is because their detestable practices will sway you. They're not even in the land yet, and already, and so this is like, I'm telling you, I told you this is what's going to happen.
Yeah. So of course God's jealous. Yep. There's a plague. I think 24,000 died, and Moses was instructed to destroy the Moabites.
Yep.
Yeah. And like you said, maybe it's going back to Balaam.
Yep. Well, it's interesting because even though chapter 24 ends with so Balaam went home.
Yeah.
But in Numbers chapter 31, and then all the way at the back of the book in Revelation chapter 2, God basically blames Balaam for what happens here. It's almost as if Balaam's like, okay, I can't curse them, but here's what you might try.
Yeah. If I were you,
I'm not. You didn't hear from me. I'm just. I'm going home. I'm going home.
Right.
But you might try this, and that's what ended up working. And so Balaam is blamed actually multiple times after this event for what happened, even though his name doesn't show up here in chapter 25.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so we get into chapter 26, or actually, we don't get into chapter 26. It's not part of the reading, but we've been talking about another census is going to happen. That's chapter 26.
Yep.
And we find the number is 601,730.
Which is about
So-
2,000 fewer than the first census.
Right. So all things considered, pretty close.
Yeah. Well, what that
Wandering
means.
around a
Yeah.
desert.
Right. So assuming, remember, the entire generation of at least men has to be wiped out.
Right.
Well, that was 603,000
Right.
of age 20 and up from the first census. That means over the past 40ish years, more than 600,000 just men
Yeah. Of
have
that
had
age.
to die. Right.
Right. And we're born. Oh, and
Right. So now you've got the births almost match the deaths, except it probably wasn't just the men who died. So you've got wives who died. You've got an entire generation that was wiped out, and Israel comes into the land weaker this time, numbers wise,
right.
than they would have had
yeah.
they done it the first time. They feel like they're in a weaker position.
So then we get into chapters 27 through 30, and there's just a list of events, and it's then this. Here's how we're treating this. Here's how we're treating that.
Yep.
And you're thinking, what is all this? But I think it's God preparing them to actually go into the promised land, and here's the rules we're going to live by.
Yeah.
So it's not the full, or Numbers isn't giving you the full law,
Right.
But it's giving you selected parts of it, and
Yeah.
maybe in a different focus of it too.
Yeah, so it seems like there are going to be a lot of things that are sort of pushed through very quickly over the next couple of chapters.
Yeah.
The Book of Deuteronomy is basically what takes place during this time. Okay, so we usually think Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, everything just pushes forward,
right.
And that's not really true. Leviticus happens while they're at Sinai in Exodus. Deuteronomy happens while they're here in Numbers. And so if you take these couple of chapters in Numbers and it breaks out into Deuteronomy, so that's where you get the full detail. The word Deuteronomy means second law. And so it's the second giving of the law, because Sinai was 40 years ago. These people, many of these people were not even born yet.
Right.
And so they have to be not just reminded of these things, they've got to be told these things. Moses is going to give the law again. He's going to hash through all this stuff. And so what Numbers does is just very quick summary. And, assuming Moses wrote these in order, did he know he was going to write an entire book of Deuteronomy, or was he just summarizing things here?
Yeah.
That
Right.
type of thing. I find it interesting. One of the, at the beginning of chapter 27, there's this little section called Special Inheritance Laws. And I really like this one. The story of,
Yeah.
or the account of the daughters of
right.
Zelophehad.
Right.
It's really,
Well, now you gotta
it's just
go through it now.
basically when the land is divided, it has to stay within the tribes. Okay,
Right.
every 50 years, if there was parts sold off, they had to go back to the right people. Yeah, basically.
Right.
Okay, because God is the one who owns the land. He's giving it to the nation of Israel, sort of on lease in a sense, but he's still the holder.
Right.
Okay, but it has to be passed down through sons. Zelophehad had no sons.
Right. So we have a bunch of
So we got,
girls.
yeah,
right?
we got
so
four,
what happens?
four daughters, and so they'd never run into this before. And this is this is really why I like this account, because they said, "What do we do about this?" And they came to Moses, "What do we do about this? How do we do an inheritance? Because if we marry somebody, then it goes to their family, and our family has no inheritance anymore, right?" And I love the fact that even though God gave the law, some people think if God would just tell us what to do, we would know what to do and everything would be fine. God had given them the law, and they still had to work through things that as situations came up.
Yeah.
And I just really like that concept that they had to come to Moses, and Moses is like, that's a head scratcher.
Let me get right back with you.
I'm going to phone this one in. Phone a friend. Hey, I'm going to.
Yeah.
And God says, that's a great question. Thank you for wrestling with the law. Thank you for trying to do
the right thing.
The right thing. Here's how you do it. And I just really like the concept behind that.
Yeah. Also in chapter 27, there's a leadership change.
Yep.
And again, it's one of those things that is incredibly huge, but it's a couple sentences. Yeah. So Moses steps down, or is told that he's going to step down.
Yep.
So Joshua is leading now.
Hands off the baton to Joshua. Yeah. Same thing. It's the same thing as in the rest of these. This will get a lot more face time, a lot more ink in Deuteronomy than it does here. This is just a really quick gloss over.
Yeah. Well, speaking of gloss over, I'm going to continue to gloss over. Chapter 28 and 29, there rules for daily, weekly, monthly offerings.
Yep.
Passover.
Feast days.
What do we do about first fruits?
Yep.
Blowing of the trumpets. Remember from a couple weeks ago, they were told to make these trumpets.
Yep.
So kind of a reminder, hey, here's when you blow the trumpets and what it means and what's happening. Day of Atonement, Feast of the Temporary Shelters.
Yep. These are all the feast
like
days.
The major headings and
these are all the feast days that God built into the nation of Israel. Right. So Hanukkah would come later. That's not one that God designed. Yeah. Purim from Esther will come later, that is added to the calendar. But these are the ones that God said every year you have to do it. You have to do it on this day or on these days and at this time and exactly this way. Right.
Chapter 30 is everything you want to know about vows. And I really like it that for the guy's side, it's one verse, and that is, don't break your word, do what you said you were going to do.
Yep. If you're going to make a vow, do it.
Yeah. And it's like, wow. Women, they take 13 verses. It's a little more involved. I know it sounds bad, but it's not bad. But there's a difference here in the vows. Yeah,
because there are actually 3 sections. If a vow was made by a single woman, if a vow was made by a married woman, and if a vow was made by a widow.
Yeah, except the title says other. And I was like, other? How can there be other? My title said other. And it was divorced or...
Divorced or widowed.
Yeah, widowed. Yeah. That was the other one. Right.
Yeah. Right. So basically this reminds us, because single, married, or divorced, widowed, right?
Yeah.
This reminds us that these vows that are being made, these are spiritual vows. These aren't like, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. These are spiritual vows. These are like I'm committing myself to God, whatever, Nazirite type vows or whatever, potentially, right? And it's a reminder that God has always designed men to be the spiritual leaders in their homes, and this is a community of families. Right. Families of families of families, right? And so for a man, if he makes a vow to God, he has to fulfill it.
Right.
If a woman makes a vow to God, she is under the headship of a man somewhere, either her father or her husband, right?
Yep.
And so
needs to go through them.
Yeah, so to go through them to God. So if she does something foolish, if she does something that would maybe go against something that he did or something outside the family or whatever, the father or the husband actually had the right to say, that's not what we do. That's not how we serve God. That's not how we worship God. Right. And he could actually nullify that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. So
interesting how that works.
Now, some people may have issues with that. Especially in today's society or whatever. We don't live in quite the same type of patriarchal society. There's definitely still some of that in our society and in some of our homes. The bigger principle is still, though, we're not under this law. We're not, living this way. But even in the New Testament, God has chosen that men are supposed to lead, especially in spiritual matters. And so... this is just an example of how that was played out in the nation of Israel. So even if we don't have to do this exact same thing, the principle still holds true.
All right. Good. Well, we intentionally didn't get into each one of these things.
What we don't want to do all the details of
Yeah.
on the 15th day and all that.
Yeah. No, I did not.
You can read about it. Well, but it's
I mean, it's an interesting read. Definitely
Yeah.
is an interesting read.
and it reminds us that God does care about little things.
Right.
In certain little things, right? There are things that we think I don't care about, but God does, or I do care about, but God doesn't. But there are certain things, and these are all have to do with worship,
Yeah.
right? These all have to do with worship. So maybe God does care about how he's worshipped and how we approach him and everything. Maybe.
Not so bad.
Yeah, just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're only a few chapters away from the end. We'll do this one more time, and then we'll be at the end of Numbers. I hope that you find it beneficial. Just little things here and there where you pick up along the way. And just remind us, the God that we know and love and we are serving, sometimes there is a particular way that he chooses to do things, and that's his right. And our duty is to learn it and to follow it. So when we have those things, that's what we want to do. One more week. We'll see you back next week as we finish up the book of Numbers.